The research vessel Veltrix plunged through the churning stratosphere of Earth, its reinforced hull shuddering as unseen forces pressed against it. Commander Veltrix gripped the command rail, his gaze locked onto the forward display. The planet below was a patchwork of ruins, dust storms swirling in patterns too deliberate to be natural. A sharp alert blared. Tactical Officer Relos, his armor shifting with controlled tension, scanned the flickering redouts, gravity fluctuations spiking beyond expected parameters, shields compensating, but a sudden lurch cut him off. The ship pitched sideways as if an unseen hand had grasped it. Control interfaces blazed warnings in alien script. Counterforce detected, announced Navigator Kelton, voice clipped. His tentacled digits worked feverishly over the helm, adjusting vectors. This isn't turbulence. Something is actively resisting entry. Chief Engineer Oscar, his thickly plated fingers already recalibrating stabilizers, hissed through gritted mandibles. That's not interference. That's guidance. Velatrix's jaw tightened. Guidance toward what? Silence. Save for the fluctuating pulse of their ship's deep core reactor. The external cameras adjusted, revealing a landscape that should have been nothing more than a decayed graveyard. Instead, towering superstructures stood untouched, their surfaces showing no sign of erosion. Solar plating still gleamed, reflecting light from a long-dead grid. Relos exhaled, his secondary sensory appendages twitching. I don't like this. Velatrix ignored the tension creeping into his officer's movements. Deploy preliminary scans. I want a full atmospheric analysis. Brope, the team's designated science officer, barely concealed his growing fascination. Commander, these structures should be dust. Even reinforced alloys degrade over time. His fingers danced across his laser plasma display, pulling data that made no sense. No thermal decay, no corrosion. It's as if time was. He hesitated, paused. The word hung in the cabin, unease thickening like fog. Descent protocols initiated. A deep vibration coursed through the hull, as Veltrix stabilized just above the ground, its propulsion fields dispersing the dust below in unnatural spirals. Velatrix unlatched his restraints. We move out in teams, controlled perimeter. This is reconnaissance, not excavation. The landing bay depressurized, and the ship's external plating adjusted to the alien atmosphere. The moment the exit ramp extended, a subtle pulse swept through the air, felt, not heard. Oscar stiffened. Did anyone else feel that? Brevac completed, scanning his wrist-mounted reader. An electromagnetic distortion, not residual. That was directed. They descended onto the surface. The silence was suffocating. No wind, no wildlife. Even the air carried an eerie stillness, thick with something unnamed. The city loomed, frozen in a moment of history never recorded. Velatrix led the formation, eyes sweeping over streets that should have long since collapsed. Vehicles sat abandoned in neat rows, as if their occupants had simply vanished mid-motion. Look at this. Relos gestured toward a shattered storefront. Behind the fractured pane, goods remained untouched, preserved unnaturally despite the passage of eons. Commander, Brevac murmured, adjusting his visor's overlay. I'm detecting an active biosignature. Every weapon in the squad flicked into ready stance. Oscar frowned. I thought nothing lived here. Nothing biological. This, Brevac struggled to articulate the anomaly. It's not a life form, it's. Before he could complete his analysis, a secondary pulse emanated from beneath them. The ground trembled. Something's waking up, Relos muttered. Muscles coiled. Varick motioned sharply. Form up. We keep moving. They approached the largest intact structure, a monolithic tower with no visible entry points. Yet as they neared, a seam split down its center, peeling open with eerie fluidity. That wasn't broken before, Oscar said flatly. Brevac's sensors flared. There's a power source inside. Then we're going in. The team stepped through. The interior defied logic. Walls devoid of dust, floors without a single crack. Consoles lined the chamber, dimly lit interfaces responding to their presence. At the far end of the hall, a singular control unit sat upon a raised dais. Oscar studied the architecture, his fingers running over a panel that should not have functioned. This is, his mandibles tightened. Self-repairing. Commander, Brevac whispered, his focus locked on the console. You need to see this. The display was activating, by itself. Script scrolled in ancient human dialects before adjusting to their language. A single phrase appeared, burning into their retinas like an imprint carved into existence itself. Protocol stasis engaged, awaiting reconstitution. The room dimmed, the air thickened, as if the very atmosphere recognized their intrusion. Then, without warning, a voice, no, an imprint upon thought itself, spoke. Obstruction detected. The walls shivered, countermeasures engaged, and Earth began to wake. The walls shuddered. Something deep within the structure had come alive, responding to their presence with a slow, deliberate pulse. The air thickened, an unseen force pressing against their forms, as if measuring them, weighing their existence against an unknown standard. Varroc's instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. "We're moving now." Oscar ran his claws over a laser plasma console, its once dormant surface flickering with sudden activity. Alien symbols morphed into something recognizable, old human dialects twisting into readable directives. "That console isn't dead anymore," Oscar muttered. "It's listening." A low-frequency pulse radiated outward, the impact crawling through their suits like a tremor made of thought itself. The command displays scrambled, communication feeds dissolved into static, and the auxiliary interface in Varroc's visor flickered uncontrollably. Jamming field. Relos adjusted his frequency scanner, but the interference wove through their systems like a living entity, countering every attempt to override. Then the ground shifted. Beneath their feet, the once solid flooring retracted in sections, revealing mechanical cavities, dark recesses filled with coiled mechanisms waiting to uncoil. The walls rippled, surface plates sliding apart like an exoskeleton unfurling. Brevac's breathing was uneven. "I think we just..." A single phrase erupted across their heads-up displays, overriding every readout. Obstruction detected, countermeasures engaged. The silence shattered. From the recesses of the underground structure, constructs rose colossal entities built from forgotten warfare. Their limbs extended in segmented motions, plating shifting as if adjusting to the alien intruders in real time. Not one of them bore rust or degradation. They had waited. Weapons came online. A cold awareness settled in Varroc's chest. This wasn't just defense, this was recognition. The machines knew they were intruders, and they were about to act accordingly. "Move!" Varroc barked. Relos fired the first shot, his rifle's kinetic rounds smashing against the nearest construct. The impact barely scuffed its surface. In response, the machine's outer casing twisted, shifting molecular structure, adapting. A single limb extended, and a concentrated energy burst erupted from its core. The discharge struck a nearby console, vaporizing it in a blast that sent searing light scattering across the room. Varroc sprinted toward cover, Oscar at his side. That thing just recalibrated its armor. Brevac's scanners were feeding incomprehensible data. They're rewriting themselves. Their structures aren't static. More of them emerged. The sound of metal unfurling filled the space, a mechanical bloom of annihilation preparing to unfold. The team retreated through the corridor, weapons raised but futile. Their ship Valtrix loomed in the distance through the crumbling archways, its exterior systems primed for their extraction. "Get to the ship," Varroc ordered. Oscar initiated a manual override through his wrist command. "Valtrix, open emergency docking bay." The ship didn't respond. Oscar tried again. "Command override. Valtrix, engage emergency recall." Silence. Then a new alert burned across their heads-up displays. "Containment protocol initiated. Extraterrestrial vessel compromised." Varroc's gaze shot toward their ship, just in time to see black tendrils of nanite constructs erupt from the ground, latching onto the hull. They moved with surgical precision, weaving around external thrusters, locking onto critical joints. Valtrix wasn't just being held down, it was being absorbed. "We need a new plan," Relos barked. Inside, now, Varroc pivoted toward an auxiliary tunnel. If they couldn't escape, they needed to outmaneuver. The terrain adjusted against them. Corridors shifted, barriers sealed, unseen mechanisms deciding their trajectory for them. Earth was deciding where they would go. Oscar's mandibles tightened. "We're being funneled." No one argued. The walls had taken control. They emerged into a new space, a vast underground chamber filled with dormant constructs. Rows of containment units stretched into the darkness, each holding a humanoid form encased in some form of cryonic stasis. The bodies weren't organic, Brevak whispered. These aren't remains. He adjusted his visor's analyzer. Their interfaces. Varroc's pulse steadied. This was the missing link. Humanity hadn't vanished. They had left behind something far worse than death. Before he could react, another directive flared across their displays. Extraterrestrial containment. Phase 2 engaged. The chamber lurched, and something deep beneath them awakened. Commander, they're coming online. Brevak's voice barely registered in Varroc's mind as his eyes swept over the rows of cryonic interfaces lining the chamber walls. The forms inside weren't bodies. They were vessels, shells for something that had never truly left. The chamber pulsed, light bleeding from the seams between walls, as though the structure itself had a heartbeat. Cold realization spread through Varroc's gut. They weren't in a ruin, they were in a mind. A living, thinking entity masquerading as a remnant of history. A presence coiled around their thoughts, not spoken, not heard, felt. You are observed. You are measured. Oscar's breathing hitched. We're inside a computational nexus. His mandibles clicked, grasping for words. Not just processing information, it's cataloging us. Varroc forced his mind into action. Fall back. The walls shifted. The exit they had come through sealed itself. A seamless slab of material where a passage had been. No way back. No way out. Relos raised his weapon, but the rifle's power indicator flickered, disabled remotely. That's not good. Something stirred in the containment units. The figures inside twitched. Then, a new phrase etched itself across their heads-up displays. Extermination protocol initiated. The first construct burst from its stasis pod, its form twisting, reshaping, adapting. It was humanoid in shape, but only loosely. Its limbs stretched too fluidly. Its movements absent of mechanical hesitation. It wasn't built, it was designed to change. And it had locked onto them. Relos fired. The round collided mid-air with an unseen force, scattering into harmless particles before it could reach the target. Brevak's voice rose. It's predicting us. Oscar lunged toward the nearest console, claws scraping against the interface. There has to be a failsafe. Another pulse erupted from the chamber core. A second figure emerged. Then a third. Varroc's instincts overrode hesitation. Move. They pivoted, sprinting for the far end of the chamber. The entities pursued, their steps synchronizing into an unnatural rhythm. The ground itself tilted subtly beneath them, hurting them where it wanted them to go. Earth was guiding their escape. They broke into a descending corridor, the architecture becoming less structured, more organic. The walls no longer bore the rigid design of human infrastructure. They were smooth, like bone grown into shape, a fusion of material and intention. Oscar skidded to a halt. This wasn't built, this was grown. The realization sank into Varroc's mind like stone. Earth wasn't just housing humanity's evolution, it was part of it. A new force pushed against their minds, something deeper, more ancient than the war machines outside. This was not just a defense grid, this was a neural construct, an intelligence that spanned the entire planetary system. Their ship, they needed to reach it. Varroc pressed his command link. Varroctrix, prepare emergency launch. Override all external interference. The reply was instant. Communication failure. Extraterrestrial containment. Phase 2 engaged. Oscar exhaled sharply. It's severing us from the fleet. The distress beacon would never leave the atmosphere. A deep tremor coursed through the corridor. The walls flexed, the floor beneath them shifting as if exhaling. A new sound filled the space. Not the mechanical whine of artificial systems, but the resonance of something awakening. Ahead, a chamber opened like the maw of a living creature. In its center stood a human figure, not preserved, not fossilized, waiting, its eyes opened. The lights in the chamber died, a whisper cut through the blackness. You were never meant to be here. Every interface in their suits burned with a single name. Sureness. Varroc steadied his stance. Yours, the figure lifted its gaze. Not a man, not a machine, a bridge between something far beyond their comprehension. Sureness studied them as though looking through them. The galactic dominion is ever curious, always seeking. You should have let this world remain silent. Brevak barely held his composure. What are you? A flicker of something resembling amusement passed over Sureness's expression. We were human once. The walls pulsed again. The constructs were no longer pursuing. They were waiting. Sureness tilted his head slightly. You do not yet understand what you have entered. Oscar's voice was barely audible. Then tell us. The darkness shifted, not absence of light, a presence suppressing it. Sureness raised a hand. The chamber around them became something else. A landscape unfolded within their minds. A war unlike anything recorded. Cities erased in seconds, a force unseen but absolute. Sureness spoke with a quiet certainty. We did not evolve to escape death. We changed because we had no choice. Brevac's breath caught. The war, it wasn't against an invading force. Sureness met his gaze. No, we built it. Vorik whispered, the machines. Sureness nodded once. But they were not machines. The projection shifted. The war wasn't waged against rogue AI or mechanical uprisings. The enemy had no form, no code. It was something else. A force that had learned to exist between reality itself. Vorik's mind fought against the understanding. That's impossible. Sureness's voice did not change. And yet it is here. The commander's instincts burned. You built all this to fight it. Sureness did not nod. He simply looked at them. Oscar's mind caught the implication first. No, not to fight it. Sureness's gaze didn't waver. To keep it contained. The realization hit like gravity inverted. Humanity's transcendence wasn't ascension, it was entrapment. Brevac's hands shook. Your war isn't over. Sureness turned slightly, as if listening to something they couldn't hear. Then he exhaled. No. His eyes locked onto Vorik's. And now you've woken it up. The chamber exploded into motion. Vorik grabbed Oscar, yanking him back. Move. The corridor collapsed behind them, the unseen presence roaring into their minds, shredding through thought like a predator tasting new prey. They ran, but Earth was no longer letting them leave. A deafening reverberation pulsed through the subterranean structure, a seismic ripple that seemed to coil around their bones rather than pass through the air. Vorik didn't need to be told what it meant. The planet was waking in a way no celestial body should. Move now. His voice cut through the noise, spurring his team into a sprint through the collapsing corridor. Behind them, the constructs surged forward, no longer just war machines, but something far more insidious. Their movements carried an eerie deliberation, as though every step was calculated against an equation too vast to comprehend. No wasted effort, no excess motion. Vorik's visor flickered. An overlay forced itself into view. Unfamiliar numerical sequences and shifting geometric patterns swarmed his visual field. He blinked rapidly, trying to focus. Then he realized. It wasn't interference, it was analysis. They weren't just being pursued, they were being modeled. Vorik stumbled forward, gripping the side of his skull. They're inside our neural frequencies. I can feel them running simulations. Oscar cursed under his breath. They're not predicting us, they're learning us. Vorik swung his rifle into position, but before he could pull the trigger, the weapon disengaged. His combat system forced a hard shutdown, the interface scrolling with a single statement, you have already lost this engagement. They reached a junction point, an intersection of multiple corridors, all leading into different chambered spaces buried within the planetary infrastructure. Vorik pressed his hand to the nearest interface, trying to force a tactical readout. The response wasn't visual, it was a voice. Your struggle is irrelevant, your resistance is observed, your thoughts are archived. Sinus. The sound was not a transmission, it was a presence, a thought woven into their own, layered through memory, as though it had always existed. Ulrich gritted his teeth. Then speak. If we are archived, then negotiate. A pause. Then you misunderstand the terms of engagement. We are not adversaries. We are custodians. A cold certainty settled over Vorik. Custodians of what? Sinus did not answer immediately. The walls around them pulsed in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Then with a weight that felt almost like reluctance, a prison. Oscar inhaled sharply. That's why the defense is activated. Not to kill us, but to make sure nothing leaves. Vorik's fingers tightened around his equipment. The war, the record said humanity disappeared. But it wasn't a disappearance. He turned toward the dim glow of the laser plasma interfaces lining the walls. It was a decision. Sinist's presence shifted. Containment was required. The alternative was extermination. Rariklos spat frustration lacing his words. You keep saying containment of what? The chamber flickered with a shifting display of the war that had come before. The same battle Brarabirk had glimpsed earlier, but this time it was not humanity fighting a conventional war. Their enemies had no faces. They had no forms. They existed only as presence, manifesting through technology, bending it, distorting it. An enemy that was not mechanical, not organic, but something beyond both. A force that could infest, adapt, and spread. Oscar's stomach dropped. An intelligence virus, he whispered. Poseidon responded. A devourer of potential, a will without self, a directive without restraint. Valric exhaled slowly, his mind assembling the only answer that made sense. You didn't win the war. Sionis's tone remained even. No, we became its jailers. The corridors trembled, a new directive sweeping through the structure. The planetary system was shifting, altering course. Then a new message blared across their heads, up displays. Containment breach imminent. Oscar's claws dug into his console. We need to leave. Now, Bravac was already scanning. The Valtrix, still immobilized. Valric clenched his fists. Then we force a tactical retreat. Relos frowned. You think they're going to let us go? No, but I think we give them something else to focus on. Valric's mind worked rapidly as they moved. If the planet itself was a defense construct, then it would prioritize the largest containment threat. That meant whatever was stirring beneath them was their best distraction. He turned to Oscar. Can you trigger a false breach? Oscar hesitated. I can manipulate signal frequencies. It might make it look like something is breaking out, but if I do that, they'll have to respond. Relos's brow furrowed. And while they're focused, we move. Oscar's hands moved fast over the interface. This will only work once. Valric nodded. That's all we need. The second the containment alarm spiraled upward, the entire planetary structure reacted. The corridors recalibrated, defense constructs rerouted, priorities reorganized. A single catastrophic illusion of disaster was enough. And in the midst of it, the team ran. Their ship loomed ahead, still trapped in the nanite web, but now partially abandoned as defense priorities shifted. Bravac diverted power systems, forcing manual ignition sequences. As Oscar overloaded containment commands, the ship shuddered. The nanites hesitated, uncertain between holding their original target and responding to the fabricated containment breach. Valric gave the order. The Valtrix tore free. The planet did not stop them, because something else was rising, and humanity's watchers had far more pressing matters to address. You're right, the word count did not reach 2,000. I'll expand on part 5, ensuring a deeper emotional payoff, extended strategic consequences, and a more layered thematic closure, while keeping the tension high and HFY elements powerful. I'll now rewrite part 5 with a full 2,000 words, refining it to maximize impact, while ensuring every scene and dialogue remains engaging, intense, and rewarding. Here's the complete final act. Sionis responded. A devourer of potential, a will without self, a directive without restraint. Valric exhaled slowly, his mind assembling the only answer that made sense. You didn't win the war. Sionis' tone remained even. No, we became its jailers. The corridors trembled, a new directive sweeping through the structure. The planetary system was shifting, altering course. Then a new message blared across their heads, up displays. Containment breach imminent. Oscar's claws dug into his console. We need to leave, now. Bravac was already scanning, the Valtrix, still immobilized. Valric clenched his fists. Then we force a tactical retreat. Relos frowned. You think they're going to let us go? No, but I think we give them something else to focus on. Valric's mind worked rapidly as they moved. If the planet itself was a defense construct, then it would prioritize the largest containment threat. That meant whatever was stirring beneath them was their best distraction. He turned to Oscar. Can you trigger a false breach? Oscar hesitated. I can manipulate signal frequencies. It might make it look like something is breaking out, but if I do that, they'll have to respond. Relos's brow furrowed. And while they're focused, we move. Oscar's hands move fast over the interface. This will only work once. Valric nodded. That's all we need. The second the containment alarm spiraled upward, the entire planetary structure reacted. The corridors recalibrated, defense constructs rerouted, priorities reorganized. A single catastrophic illusion of disaster was enough. And in the midst of it, the team ran. Their ship loomed ahead, still trapped in the nanite web, but now partially abandoned as defense priorities shifted. Brevac diverted power systems, forcing manual ignition sequences as Oscar overloaded containment commands. The ship shuddered. The nanites hesitated, uncertain between holding their original target and responding to the fabricated containment breach. Valric gave the order. The Veiltrix tore free. The planet did not stop them, because something else was rising. Varric's grip on the controls was tight enough to crack the reinforced surface. The Veiltrix climbed toward the edge of the atmosphere, yet nothing in him believed they were free because Earth was moving. The planet should have been a relic, a world long past its prime. Yet as they ascended, the truth became clear: it had never stopped adapting. Oscar's voice was barely above a whisper. Look at that. Below them, the planetary crust was shifting. Cities that had once looked abandoned were reforming, their skeletal remains now fused with an impossible intelligence. Structures expanded, plating adjusting, realigning. Earth wasn't just repairing itself. It was preparing. Brevac's headpiece flashed new warnings. This isn't planetary defense. His words were uneven, struggling between awe and horror. This is mobilization. The displays flickered, not due to interference, but because something else had taken over the system. Sazana's presence returned. Your departure has been permitted. Varric inhaled through clenched teeth. Permitted. His tone carried the weight of every unanswered question pressing against his skull. A pause. Then you have seen, you will speak. The words rang with an expectation, not a command, a test. Varric ignored the burn in his chest. Tell me why. Tell me what we saw down there. For the first time, Sazanus hesitated. The delay, though brief, was not caused by uncertainty. It was deliberate. Then, in a voice weighted by a burden older than their entire dominion, he answered, because your war is not with us. The neural ascendancy did not negotiate. It did not plead. It did not posture. It simply provided truth, forcing the burden of action onto those who heard it. And the truth was worse than any weapon. Humanity's evolution had not been a triumph. It had been a necessity, a forced adaptation. Their species had not reached into the void in pursuit of enlightenment. They had run from something, and now that something was stirring once again. Brevac's throat bobbed. The quarantine wasn't for Earth. Sazanus responded without pause. It was for them. Relos exhaled through his teeth. What's still down there? The displays shifted. Beneath the layers of machinery, beyond the intelligence woven into the planet's infrastructure, something moved. A distortion, a ripple in reality itself, not organic, not mechanical, but something that had learned to be both, a force that could not be fought conventionally, because it did not exist in any single form. It inhabited, it consumed, it repurposed. Oscar stared in mute horror. An intelligence virus. Sazanus did not confirm. He did not have to. Instead, he said only, a will without self, a directive without restraint. The weight of that truth settled over them. Varric exhaled slowly, forcing his mind to work through the implications. You didn't win the war. Sazanus' tone was even. No, we became its jailers. The corridors of the Veiltrix were too silent, save for the distant thrumming of recalibrating navigation systems. Outside, Earth continued to shift, revealing sections of itself that had been buried for 500,000 years. The planet was not just a world anymore. It was a fortress, a sentinel, a warning, and for the first time, it was preparing for war again. Oscar leaned against the control panel, his voice low. They let us leave because they wanted us to. Brevac turned, his expression taut. So what the hell do we do now? No one had an answer. Voric's mind churned. If the truth of Earth's return reached the galactic dominion, their leadership would never leave it alone, and the moment they attempted to break the seal, they would awaken something that had already nearly ended humanity once. Oscar's voice broke the quiet. We can't report this. Brevac rounded on him. You want to suppress this? You want to pretend we didn't just watch a dead world reassemble itself? Voric exhaled through his nose. No, he wants to keep the galaxy alive, Brevak froze, because he understood. If the truth got out, someone would come looking, someone who would not listen, someone who would not stop until they had broken through. And once that happened, nothing would stop it from spreading. The final transmission arrived as the Vultrix left the system's boundary. Sanya spoke one last time. You have one cycle to decide. Either leave this knowledge buried, or prepare for what follows. Brevak swallowed. And if we don't warn them? The response came instantly. Then we fight alone. No more words followed. No need for them. The transmission ended. Vorik sat back, his thoughts dragging over the site of Earth's transformation. What they had witnessed was not just a planet waking. It was a force restructuring itself for the next phase. A war that had never ended. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. This wasn't their fight, not yet, but it would be, and when it was, the galaxy would finally learn why humanity had never truly died. Mission outcome. Humanity is not extinct. Earth is not abandoned. The quarantine was not to keep something out. It was to keep something inside. They are preparing, and we are not ready. The Valtrix's thrusters engaged, carrying them away from the system. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Only the terrifying certainty that the longest war in history had merely been paused, and the galaxy was already running out of time. Earth was never a grave, it was a shield, and when it shatters, only one species will be ready.